You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Common Descent, a podcast about paleontology, evolution, the history of life on Earth, all sorts of stuff like that. This is episode 250 of the Common Descent podcast, which is a pretty fun little milestone to hit. That's a quarter of 1,000.
Quarter of the way there.
Oh, come on, we're getting there. 4 digits or bust. And for this milestone, it's not 100, right? We did special stuff for 100
Yes.
and 200. 300, we'll do something special. For 250, figured we would do something extra fun and something that would be a real crowd pleaser, because so many of our dear listeners have been requesting and waiting very patiently for us to do an episode about camels.
Camels!
So this episode, we will explore the modern diversity of camels. There are only a handful of species in this family, so we'll get to go into some detail about what makes them unique and interesting. We'll talk about their famous adaptations that allow them to survive in unexpected places, and then we'll take a tour of the fossil record and explore some of the weird and wonderful camels of Earth history.
Yeah, I'm excited. These are such weird, fascinating animals.
They're super fun. This was a really fun episode to put together. And as I alluded to, this has been requested. All of our episodes are requested topics, but this one, more than most. Camels as a subject was requested by Martin, Jonathan, Timon, Ed, Andrea, Vince, Hadley, Khalil, Bohan, Lydia, Iociolectus, Buddy, Lachette, Josiah, Emmett, Ava, Teoranosaurus, Pat, Sarah, Jacob, Ryan, Tamara, Tracy, Morgan, Zelfia, James, Devo, Kyla, and of course, Jackie, who has been perhaps the most vocal champion of our eventual Camels episode. Here it is, everybody.
Thank you to all you camel enthusiasts.
Before we get into it, some quick announcements. First and foremost, as always, this podcast is supported almost entirely by the support we receive on Patreon. Subscribers to our Patreon get access to all sorts of bonus content, early episodes of some of our YouTube content, live streams with us every month. There's merch, there's patron questions, and at certain levels, new patrons get their names shouted out here on the podcast. This episode, our new patron shoutouts go to Paul, Jeremy, Gerald, and a happy birthday to Gabriel.
Thank you all and happy birthday, Gabriel. Welcome to the Patreon.
If you, dear listener, would like to consider supporting us on Patreon, head on over to there's a link in the episode description. Speaking of donations on Patreon, we just wrapped up 2026 Croc and Snake Month, and thanks to the incredible support and participation of our listeners, particularly on Patreon, we were able to raise a whole bunch of funds in the Crocs and Snakes tier on Patreon, which means we will this year be able to make donations of $500 each to the Crocodile Research Coalition, Save the Snakes, and new this year, the Natural Resources Defense Council, all three of which do various education, advocacy, and support for wildlife, wild environments, crocs, snakes, and all the rest.
Yeah, thank you all for participating in our Croc and Snake months and helping us make these wonderful donations.
And speaking of donations, just a quick shout out to a couple of listeners who have given us special additional one-off donations. Thank you to Winston and Andrea for your gracious support.
Yes, thank you for taking that extra little time to just make a direct donation. So that's something special about that.
Elsewhere in Common Descent land, there's all sorts of stuff going on. If you head over to the YouTube channel, you can watch Will's ongoing Bricks with Basque building Lego based on the stuff we talked about here on the podcast.
Yeah.
Right now, our Pokemon Sand and Bone series is on the YouTube, where I come up with ideas for Pokemon inspired by Earth history. Go check that out. Leave It to Us is more than halfway through their second season, talking about plants and all sorts of plant-adjacent goodness. This month, Will and I are on the verge, as of this recording, of putting together this year's Spook-E. So stay tuned for more about that in the not too distant future. But in the less distant future, the first weekend of September, Will and I will be returning to DragonCon in Atlanta to do all sorts of nerdy science shenanigans. We are going to be on a whole bunch of panels this year, as usual. We've got, I'm not going to list every single one of them. We'll post them on the Discord. We'll post them on the social medias. We got panels about Halloween skeletons and about James Bond science and about I'm moderating a panel about AI use in science and beyond.
Yeah.
We got a panel about what counts as a species. I think that panel is called No Such Thing as a Fish. Will's talking about teeth and also the science of SpongeBob. We got a whole bunch of cool stuff. Most of it is going to be on the science track at DragonCon, although we will be returning to the gaming track with our friend Swesbian for the What's That Dinosaur in Video Games panel once again.
Yes, I'm so excited.
So if you are in Atlanta around DragonCon, if you're going to be at DragonCon, come say hi. Come say hi to us and all of our cool science friends.
Absolutely.
Now, before we dive into this episode's camely goodness, let's do some news. Just like every other episode, we will begin by talking about some new scientific research that caught our eye in the news lately. Will, what news have you brought?
I have news about stomach stones and what they can tell you about how that animal was digesting its food.
Ooh.
Yes. This is research by Ryuji Takasaki et al. In Paleobiology, and the article is a press release in phys.org. So, stomach stones, gastroliths, are stones swallowed very often by archosaurs, dinosaurs, crocs, birds, all known for swallowing stones or grit, sand, to help grind up and process their food. This is especially famous in birds that have a muscular, specialized portion of the stomach and esophagus called the gizzard that actively grinds food using this grit, these gastrolith material. But we know them from dinosaur skeletons where we find collections of stones in the rib cage in the area the gut would be in. This is interesting because it tells us about how these dinosaurs might have been processing their food, but it might be able to give us even more insights than we were getting previously. This study wanted to see, is there a pattern to what the state of the gastroliths are in different digesting animals? So they looked at 104 individuals of 46 species of our today archosaurs, so birds and crocodilians, and looked at the shape of the gastrolith in those animals, the stomach muscularity, so how muscular is the stomach, how gizzard-like is it, or unmuscular, and what their diet is to see if there's a pattern. And they found that there is, that in mostly the herbivorous taxa, they found more worn down, rounded gastroliths from more severe abrasion due to more muscular stomachs used to actively grind up plant material in usually very muscular gizzards.
Mm-hmm.
While the carnivorous taxa retained more angular, less rounded, less worn down gastroliths, so just a little bit smoothed over rocks because they were less abraded with less muscular stomachs, less grinding of the food because they aren't processing tough plant material the same way. This was even true for predators that were going after invertebrates, so like insects and stuff. So even with tougher food, they still did not show the same level of grinding that the herbivores do.
I'm thrilled you said that because that was my thought. Is that plants are tougher than meat is.
Yes,
generally speaking. But if you're eating bugs, that's exoskeleton. You're crunching and crushing things.
Yeah, they didn't know if there was like any range within the predators to see if like the insects did show a little bit more, but they notably did not show nearly as much as the plants. They then looked at some dinosaurs and their gastroliths to see what kind of gastroliths do we see in different groups. And the pattern is very interesting. In herbivorous groups like ornithischians and sauropods, so the group that contains your hadrosaurs and your ceratopsians and your long-necked dinosaurs, both have angular gastroliths. With the ornithischians, it's thought, the hypothesis is they had really good chewing systems.
Yes.
They had exceedingly complex tooth batteries in both the ceratopsians and hadrosaurs. They likely were processing their food much like modern mammals, most of it happening in the mouth, and the gastroliths helping but not doing the bulk of the work.
Right.
The sauropods, who do not have fancy chewing structures, but probably were able to ferment their food for a long period in very long, large guts. So once again, no need for crazy active grinding.
And also, once again, a thing that mammals do.
Yes. The group we do see rounded gastroliths in is toothless theropods that adapted to plant eating. So theropods, usually the two-legged meat eaters, but many of them adapted to being herbivores, especially in the maniraptorans. And those are often the ones that we see losing tooth, evolving beaks, and becoming plant eaters like your ornithomimids and your therizinosaurs and those. In many of these groups, we see rounded stones suggesting that they had powerful muscular gizzards or something similar for grinding up plant material, much more similar to our modern day herbivorous birds.
Fascinating. That's interesting
Yeah.
for a couple of reasons. One, it makes a lot of sense because toothless theropods, one of those groups is birds.
Yes.
Right? Modern birds are toothless theropods. They're closely related, so that makes sense that they would have a similar feature. But the other thing that's really interesting about that is that it implies that the gizzard, that muscular grinding action, might be an adaptation that this lineage required to be effective herbivores because they didn't come from an ancestry that had developed some other specialized herbivory method, like the grinding teeth of ceratopsians or the big fermenting guts, presumably of sauropods, which we also see in mammals. This might be one of those, it's a legacy of your ancestry.
Yep.
You don't have those teeth and you don't have those guts. So now you need to come up with some third thing. And the third thing, perhaps, is that muscular grinding gizzard.
And they said that this may be why we see so many repeated shifts to herbivory in theropods, that if they had this muscular gizzard, it might have been what allowed this to evolve so many times in this group.
Ooh, that's very cool.
Right?
Gastroliths are such a fascinating piece of animal biology because they're really interesting, these stomach stones. But for as long as I have been in this field, I have heard back and forth arguments about how actually scientifically useful fossil gastroliths are.
Yes.
With the back and forth of what can you actually tell from them? Can you even accurately identify them? In what circumstances can you identify them? So it's always really fun to see new research come out that pushes the argument in one direction over the other. And as researchers are constantly revisiting this question of surely there are things we can learn from stomach stones in the fossil record.
Yeah, I like this one. This one was fascinating.
That's very cool. Now, as you started your thing there, I have two newses, and I have to debate which one to follow that up with because both of mine would be pretty good follow ups. I'm gonna stick with the first. I'm gonna stick with the one that has a less exciting headline, and I'll save that one for last. My first news, therefore, is also about archosaurs, specifically a very early relative of this group of reptiles that represents one of the earliest steps of the aquatic reptile diversity of the Mesozoic era.
Nice.
This is research published by Wei Wang et al. In Science Advances, and we will link in the blog post to an article on Reuters by Will Dunham. Very beginning of the Mesozoic, the Triassic period starts in the wake of the Permian mass extinction, episode 45, and following that extinction event, life takes on all sorts of new forms and radiates into all sorts of new habitats. Famously in the Triassic, reptiles expand across the land, they take to the air, and many different lineages move into the oceans. This study describes a single specimen that is now one of the earliest known examples of aquatic specialization, specifically within the archosaur lineage, which is quite unusual. This is a single skeleton from the Yunnan province of China, early Triassic, about 245 million years ago. It is a complete skeleton with a long neck, an elongated body, and a very long tail. So it has kind of, similar to what we often think of with aquatic reptiles, just a long, stretched out body.
Yeah.
In total, this reptile is about 2 feet long, and they have given it the new name Ostranaga minuta, because, it's so small.
It's tiny.
And the researchers have identified it within a group of archosauromorphs, so not proper archosaurs, but early cousins of true archosaurs. This is a clade called Tanysauria, which has 2 major families. On the one side, Tanystrophiids, which are famously wildly long necks and thought to be at least partially aquatic. And on the other side, Trachelosauridae, which also have long necks and very long tails and are thought to be at least partially aquatic.
Yeah, this was the group that I thought of when you were first describing this. Like it sounds like a itty bitty early form of a Tanystrophiid.
Yes. Specifically, Ostranaga is identified within Trachelosaurs. So the other group. And when you look at the skeleton, it has a long neck, but a very long tail. So it doesn't quite have those wonky proportions of Tanystrophius. It is more closely related to things like Dinocephalosaurus, another one of these long-necked, long-tailed early reptiles. What makes Ostranaga really interesting compared to all those others is that while all of those cousins show adaptations for aquatic living, Ostranaga shows even more specialization for aquatic lifestyles, and it's also very early in the Triassic, making it the earliest known archosauromorph with highly specialized aquatic features.
Cool.
Like its cousins, it has flattened limb bones. So like the arm and leg bones and the fingers are flattened a bit to give them more of a paddle shape. The limbs in general are paddle-like we think of having flippers. And they have no claws on the hands. They've lost them. On top of that, they show weaker joints in the limbs, as well as a loss of the connection between the sacrum and the pelvis.
Right.
So the vertebrae and the hip bones, which is not only something we see in lots of secondarily aquatic vertebrates, but would limit its ability to get around on land.
Yes.
That means that your legs aren't going to be able to hold you up the same way.
Yeah, you can't support your own weight on the one of the main weight-bearing elements of the body.
Yes. And this new reptile also exhibits, and based on the paper, this is either unusual for this group or unique for this group. It exhibits hyperphalange.
Ooh.
Which means it has more bones in the fingers and toes.
Creepy fingers.
Longer fingers with more joints, which is something we see in a lot of aquatic reptiles in particular. I think whales also do this, a lot of aquatic tetrapods. All of this together suggests that this was, first and foremost, an obligate aquatic animal. That this probably wasn't like a sea lion, hopping in and out of the water, or like an otter. This might have been closer to a dolphin or perhaps a sea turtle, something that you really do need to be in the water in order to get anything done. And it's the oldest member of this lineage known to have done this. And on top of all that, in addition to preserving a complete skeleton, it also preserves some organs inside the skeleton. So it is also the oldest known reptile fossil to preserve remains of the stomach, liver, and intestines.
Cool.
The authors note that as opposed to its anatomy, like its skeletal anatomy, which is highly specialized, the guts are fairly simple. The intestine is fairly simple. The stomach only has one chamber, as opposed to later archosaurs, crocodilians and birds, which have a two-chambered stomach. They did identify fish scales inside the guts, which makes all the sense in the world. So we've got evidence of this very early specialization, this very early move into aquatic habitats, but with a simplified gastrointestinal tract that might be representative of early archosaur relatives in general before those later specializations kicked in. And that this thing was able, despite its specialized lifestyle, its diet might not have been highly specialized.
Yeah. Well, it makes me wonder if it's one of those where like you were eating similar things to less aquatic, less fully swimming animals because like there's lots of land animals that eat fish and
Yeah.
ergo have a very similar diet to a fully aquatic predator that eats fish. So it makes sense that you could move fully into the water without needing a fancy stomach if your ancestors were already eating fish. So
Yeah.
you're good.
Also, I feel like fish are pretty easy
Yeah.
thing to eat as digestive systems go, because there's no right, you don't have a gizzard, you're not fermenting anything. It's a fairly simple diet, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a gizzard and I love fish. So
Yeah, and you don't have any issues with it. You only have a one-chambered stomach.
I do have a reasonable amount of finger bones, which is somewhere
Sure.
a section I'm lacking on in this
And your
example.
sacrum and your pelvis are super tightly fused.
They're real, yeah, they're inseparable.
Never go anywhere. They're yes, never see one without the other.
That's very cool, and it brings up questions of like, did you have flippers? Like, how flipper like were your hands? Like, what else did you have going on to be
Yeah.
specialized in the water like this? And are you just like the extreme example of this early adaptation, or are we going to find that there was were others there was a diversity of early on that went into the water like this? That's so
Yeah.
cool. Oh, well, my next news is also about tiny archosaurs, but more importantly, also has an article written by Will Dunham in Reuters. So even an even more succinct segue.
I hope that there's something in this one about eating stuff, because my next news is going to really tie nicely into that.
I feel like maybe we could work that in somewhere.
We'll figure it out. We'll get it in there.
This news is about why aren't there tiny dinosaurs? And when we say tiny, we mean like itty bitty. This is a research looking into trying to model why dinosaurs seem to not fit this pattern and if we can find any similarities in other groups. This is research by Stephanie Lechke and Roger Benson in Evolution. So, most animal groups, and at least vertebrate groups they're focusing on, have very small members. And like when we're saying very small, we mean like mice and like frogs and little salamanders and tiny lizards and small birds. This is true in most groups, and in most cases, those are the most numerous members. Like there's more tiny species for a group than there are big members in mammals, reptiles, amphibians. The tiny ones are the most numerous. Dinosaurs don't follow this pattern based on our current understanding of them. They have, as the paper put it, a uniquely large minimum and maximum sizes.
Yeah.
That their bigs are really big, but their smallest members are also pretty big when you compare them to other groups.
Yeah.
That the smallest dinosaurs we know of are things like Microraptor, which is like estimated at 15 ounces, 430 grams. Anchiornis, which is 19 ounces, 530 grams. Like just under 20 ounces.
Yeah, those are dinosaurs that, setting aside modern birds, which are an exception, but like Microraptor and stuff are often described as crow-sized.
Uh-huh.
And a crow is not a big animal, but it's a pretty big bird.
Yeah, it's not songbird size. And as they noted, when we look at the smallest members of mammals, birds, and reptiles, the smallest birds are the bee hummingbird at 1.75 grams.
Mm-hmm.
Smallest mammals is the Etruscan shrew at 1.8 grams. And the smallest lizard's the dwarf gecko at 0.15 grams. We don't have any dinosaurs that even seem to be like non-avian dinosaurs that seem to even be remotely reaching this tiny size. So they wanted to look into the patterns of what seems to, dictate these size ranges and who does and doesn't fit this expected size range that we are thinking is missing. They used mathematical models to explore evolution of body size across vertebrate groups using the measurements of the physiology of the animal's energy uptake, so how they take energy from the environment, and the rate at which that animal converts it into offspring. So, energy they uptake into the environment and how they're turning that into offspring or converting that to their offspring. And they found that evolutionary forces favor body sizes where the rate of energy invested into offspring is maximized. So, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
They found that the body size distribution for flighted birds, mammals, and turtles all fit the expectations for this model. That they all
Okay.
fit this size range and match what we would expect based on their energy consumption and physiology. But snakes, lizards, crocodilians, and flightless birds do not follow this model.
Okay.
So they are doing something a bit different. And that, once again, as the paper put it, no reasonable combination of physiological scaling relationships explains the upshifted sizes in dinosaurs. So none of the models and no explanation within what they looked at can explain the pattern we see in dinosaurs.
Yeah, the math doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't explain the absence of really small dinosaurs and they don't seem to fit it. So there is something different going on with some of these groups.
Right. Well, and that, as an important note, is when your model can't explain the real pattern that you're seeing, it's because your model is missing something.
Yes. Yep. And they noted that when they look at the models, they performed well when the body distributions were governed. So when the thing controlling them was mostly intrinsic energetic factors. So things about how the body uses energy. But when extrinsic factors were imposed, so the ecological things that limit it, like competition, predation, ecological niche, those may also be needed to explain why. So they
Mm-hmm.
were looking at the physiology of the animal, but we may need to look at the wider energy limiters to explain this more fully. They also noted that there may be other dynamics in play. Specifically, they hypothesized that what could be happening is that while dinosaurs were around, the animals in those tiny niches were mammals and other animals, and they may have been outcompeting dinosaurs for being small bodied animals, while dinosaurs were outcompeting them for being large bodied animals. Why we don't see any mammals get much bigger than like a badger.
Yeah. This is sort of a type we don't really talk about very much, but it's sort of niche partitioning. It's size
Yes,
based niche partitioning.
exactly. They also noted that when we do see dinosaurs shift where they fit this model within flying birds, that
Mm-hmm.
is likely due to some physiological shift that happens in the evolution of birds. That something about their biology shifted and now made them fit this model that we would expect to see from mammals and turtles.
Yeah, they're also doing a very different lifestyle. Now you're
Yes.
flying, so that might also separate them.
They also said that it could be caused by the abrupt release of ecological constraints because now they can fly.
Yeah.
And you're not following the rules that other dinosaurs had to follow. You're flighted birds because once birds stop flying, they also stop following the models. Flightless birds
Yeah.
also didn't fit the models that we expected for this system. They also note that there is the explanation that maybe we just haven't found the teeny tiny dinosaurs.
I was just going to say, cut to next year when somebody
Yep.
finds a skeleton of a 2-ounce dromaeosaur, and we got to throw this hypothesis out the window.
Yep. But they do make the note that in deposits where we find dinosaurs, we often do find tiny animals.
Yeah,
Like,
we're finding those tiny mammals.
we're finding those tiny mammals. We're finding little frogs and little lizards and snakes and stuff. Like, we're finding animals that are in that size range that we're missing for the dinosaurs. So it does seem like it is a legitimate missing niche for dinosaurs.
Very interesting. The first thing that came to mind when you were describing them having sort of an upscaled size range was thinking back to episode 172 when we talked about whales and how cetaceans, there are some groups of animals that, despite being very diverse and doing something different, just seem to only exist within a certain
Yeah.
range of sizes. We talked about this with Derek in episode 222 about shrews, where like for whatever combination of reasons, some groups just fall on narrower size ranges. Dinosaurs are an interesting case before birds in particular because their range of size is shifted but not narrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Like dinosaurs, and if you include modern birds, that's dozens of tons down to tiny little hummingbirds.
So yeah, and I'll be interested to see if future research into this finds some constraints or other hypotheses that might explain why we're seeing such a discrepancy, or if
Yeah.
we can figure out why some of these modern groups don't seem to follow the pattern that you would expect.
The other thing that I have seen proposed in the past is an explanation for why there aren't very many small pterosaurs, especially in the Cretaceous period. And I've seen
Yeah.
it suggested that maybe it was because there were birds around by that
Yep.
time. And maybe that was a very similar kind of situation where birds were doing the small size really well and pterosaurs were doing big size.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, speaking of guts and things eating things, my last bit of news is about a proposed overlooked dietary factor involved in the Cambrian explosion.
Cool.
This is research published by Julian Kimmig and Russell Bicknell in Trends in Ecology and Evolution. We will link to an article in Science Alert by Michael Irving. The Cambrian explosion, episode 9, very famously at the beginning of the Phanerozoic era, is this transition from the very simple multicellular organisms of the Ediacaran period to the incredible diversity of forms of animals in the later Cambrian period. This radiation of all new forms of life living in all new niches, expanding over the course of the first tens of millions of years of the Cambrian period. Researchers have proposed many answers to the question of what changed that allowed this radiation of new life forms to develop. Some have suggested that the atmosphere, a bump in oxygen, might have fed these new larger bodies, this new diversity of them. Some have suggested there was a change in nutrients being distributed throughout the ocean. Some have pointed at that maybe the ozone layer formed around this time, and that might have offered a level of protection that allowed larger bodies to be more successful. This study proposes not mutually exclusive, but another factor that might have played a role, and in their view, a much overlooked role, and that factor is poop. They point out that poop is a huge part of ocean ecosystems and ocean nutrient and carbon cycling. In the ocean today, droppings, fecal pellets, any sorts of excrement are food for tons of organisms throughout the ocean, and critically, are a major channel of delivering nutrients from upper levels of the water down to the deeper parts of the ocean. This is hard to overstate. We've mentioned before, we talked about this in the deep sea episode 128, that there are animals on the sea floor whose diet is almost entirely consists of marine snow, which is largely droppings from animals up above. This is hugely significant.
I had an ecology professor who liked to say that everything in nature either comes down to sex or poop.
Yep. The authors point out that the Cambrian period sees the first true animals, and therefore the first true animal digestive tracts, and presumably an uptick in the amount and diversity of poop that was available at the time.
Yeah.
To explore this proposal, they do a review of Cambrian coprolites. Coprolites are fossilized fecal matter. The researchers looked at 36 Cambrian deposits around the world that preserve coprolites. These came from North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So this is a real global view. The earliest coprolites that have been reported are from the early Cambrian, about 540 million years ago. But early Cambrian coprolites are fairly hard to find and mostly very similar in their shape and structure. They mostly were tiny little pellets or what they described as films on burrows. It's like a layer, just a little layer of poop. But by the middle of the Cambrian, there is a radiation of poop abundance and of poop diversity, including all sorts of different sizes and shapes. Some of them, I think this was in one of the articles I read that described them as logs of coprolites that could be millimeters long, some of which are known with fragments of shells and stuff inside of them, which indicate this increased diversity and abundance of coprolites indicates an increase in diversity of feeding styles.
Yep.
More animals of varying sizes eating different things in different ways. They also point out that at the same time, in the fossil record, we see more well-preserved digestive systems of some of these really well-preserved animals, particularly arthropods, and we see more complex anatomy of the organs within the digestive system. All of this together, they use to propose what they describe in the title of the article as a Cambrian fecal revolution, in which more, the first true animals eating food would make poops, and then those poops would transport nutrients and carbon to new places, which would fuel new populations of new types of organisms, which themselves would produce poop, and then you get this feedback loop. And they suggest that in addition to the other factors that people have considered about the Cambrian explosion, oxygen levels changing, different shifts in the ocean, the evolution of complex animal bodies would have, as a natural side effect, increased the nutrients available in the oceans by virtue of poop.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. The idea that the Cambrian explosion, what was one of these, the Science Alert article that we will be in link to the title is An Ancient Poop Explosion Could Have Helped Complex Life Evolve. I love the idea that it's like, yeah, you can see the pattern of the Cambrian explosion really clearly. Also, you can see it in poop.
Yes. Yep. The thought I had, which this is mostly silly, but also fair that this is a thing that has been overlooked, because very often when you see like some summaries of the Cambrian explosion, one of the things that's suggested is that the evolution of eyes allowed for predator-prey interactions to finally reach a level of chase. Because beforehand, you just had to kind of bump into your prey. You could pursue them with smell, but you couldn't pursue them actively because you didn't actually know where they were. Now you could finally chase. And this caused an arms race between predator and prey, which increased the armor and all blah, 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 blah. But really, what we should have been looking at is the evolution of the butt.
Yep. The different orifice. There were butts.
And they started spreading nutrients.
And you got an arms race, but not with arms.
I also had the thought of the joke that finally we could start measuring things with the Curic in the Cambrian. The Curic
Well,
index increased.
the thing that's really funny to think about is like, once you lay this out, it feels pretty obvious. Because
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, there was a literal increase in fertilizer
Mm-hmm.
at this
Yep.
time. And if you understand ocean ecosystems, this is massively important in our modern oceans. So
Yeah.
it's possible that the Cambrian is also when we see this aspect of modern ocean ecosystems emerge for the first time, and that may have fueled the continuing diversification of life.
Because the things before the Cambrian, some of them may have been animals and may have therefore been pooping, but many of them might have been something other than animals.
Mhm.
And though they would have had waste, because some of you might be wondering of like, but I thought everything pooped. Everything does have waste, but
Yes.
not everything has feces. Not everything has a turd that they poop.
Not everything has waste that you can then eat.
Yeah, exactly. Like many of them, it's just going to be expelled. Like when we exhale, that's waste. We exhale CO2 as a waste, but you can't collect that. That's not going to lay now where I left it. That's going to just mix into the air. So a actual piece of poop is a unique collection, a dense collection of nutrients that can travel, like you said, travel from upper water to lower water,
Mhm.
which if I'm just expelling it into the water as exhaled waste, that's not going to go down to the depths.
Yes. And now it's a new food source. It's a new food
Mhm.
source in a new place. So you're creating new niches.
Who knew how important a poop was?
Some animal, some fossilized jelly shaped thing
Mhm.
is in a museum drawer right now going, ha ha! They all called me a fool.
The earliest colon.
Yes, this was my triumph. Well, that's the news. Listeners, head on over to the blog post if you want to see the links for those articles.
And speaking of animals with interesting poops.
And speaking of animals with digestive tracts, let's wrap up the news. And we're going to take a short little break. And then when we come back from the break, we're going to start talking about camels. Stay tuned. Camels are animals that belong to the aptly named family Camelidae. These are artiodactyls. So artiodactyls are your even-toed ungulates, your deer and cattle and giraffes and pigs and whales and gazelles and antelopes and stuff. Camels specifically belong to a branch called Tylopoda, which is the outermost branch of artiodactyls, which means that all other artiodactyls, all these other even-toed meaning that the weight in each foot is on the middle two toes, and they tend to have 2 or 4 toes total.
They have cloven hooves instead of the single horse-like hoof or a main middle toe.
Yes, although not all artiodactyls have hooves. We will talk about that later in this episode. All the other artiodactyls are more closely related to each other than they are to camels. Camels are the third cousins. They're the earliest branch off of this group. All living members of Tylopoda are in Camelidae, the family of camels, which is split very conveniently into 2 subgroups, Camelini, which are in the Old World. These are the animals that you think of when you think of camel. Your dromedaries, your backstring camels, the ones with humps, and Lamini, the New World camels, which are llamas and alpacas and their wild relatives.
They are really conveniently named as an overall group. Like, this is some great scientific naming going on.
It's pretty great. You're going to hear more scientific names. This is one of the easiest scientific name episodes of the podcast. This one's great. let's go through modern camels, what makes them exciting before we delve deep into their evolution. We're going to begin in the old world with capital C camels. The camels that you think of when you hear the word camel. These are large animals, right? These tend to be horse-sized at smallest. They have long legs, like a lot of other artiodactyls. They also have long necks,
Yes.
not giraffe long, but longer than most others, like longer than you think of with horses or even deer. Camels have these long, flexible necks, and they have humps, these mounds of tissue on the back, which we'll talk about here in a second. There are 3 living species of old world camels, 2 of which are domesticated. You've got dromedaries, the species Camelus dromedarius, which does sound like a cartoon made up a scientific name for this animal because they didn't know what to call them.
Oh yeah, this is like Coyoteus very hungrius from
Yes, exactly. What do we call the dromedary camel? Camelus dromedarius.
Brilliant.
Dromedaries are your one-humped camels. These are formerly native to the dry and desert regions of Africa and the Middle East. These days, they are not truly native anywhere because they are fully domesticated.
Yeah.
The other domesticated species are Bactrian camels, Camelus bactrianus,
Yep.
which are your two-humped camels. They've got one hump in front of the other. These are formerly native to Central Asia. They lived in the dry steppes and deserts in China, Mongolia, those regions. Both of these species are domesticated, considered separate species. They are maintained by people in dry regions, the kinds of places that these animals are native to. They are used for meat and for milk. They're also pack animals for carrying stuff. And they're also used for racing, like riding and racing and stuff. There are camel races, which is pretty fun.
And a concept we don't come across very often when we talk about domesticated animals, like these are domesticated. All camels of these 2 species you're going to find are domesticated. There aren't wild representatives of this species anymore.
Yes. There are feral populations.
Yes.
Most notably in Australia. There are camels that have gotten out and are no longer domesticated. They're still a domesticated species. These are dromedaries specifically, living out in the deserts of Australia, one would assume. So there are feral camels, but there are not wild dromedaries or Bactrian. The third species of Old World camels is wild camels.
Yeah.
Undomesticated. This species is Camelus ferus. Ferus meaning wild. They are called wild Bactrian camels because they live in the same place as Bactrian camels, but they're not actually closely related to our domesticated Bactrian camels. In the past, they were thought to be the wild ancestors of Bactrian camels, but genetic work has found that they actually are. These are 3 separate lineages, 3 separate species. I also learned that there was formerly a hypothesis that dromedaries might be descended from these. And there was a hypothesis that dromedary embryos went through a 2-humped stage in their development and before shifting to 1 hump, which has been disproven. That is not true. But it was considered for a while.
Well, and I can get the urge to want to more cleanly connect the 3 camels we have. Like, it's not like we've got a whole bunch for the relationships to be all crazy. It feels like these should be closely related, and the fact that they aren't as closely as we'd like is a little bit vexing.
Yes. They do appear to be 3 separate lineages. This is complicated by the fact that there's tons of hybridization between them. Dromedaries and Bactrian camels can hybridize, and they do. Generally, they don't because they don't actually live in the same places. But because they're domesticated, people, have brought them all over the place. These old world camels are defined by a whole bunch of pretty famous features, starting with the fact that old world camels are gigantic.
Yeah.
These are huge animals. Dromedaries, which are the tallest of the species, can be around 2 meters at the shoulder.
Hmm.
That's 6.5 feet shoulder height. That's so big. And
Yep.
Bactrian camels can weigh up to a ton. So these are horse-sized animals, even compared to domesticated horses, and bigger in some cases than we think of for domesticated horses. And these camels are extremely famous for living in places that you wouldn't expect an animal like this to be able to survive. They are specialists in surviving extremely harsh environments, particularly dry, arid, desert type environments.
Yeah, they got to be one of the biggest desert specialists.
Yeah. Yeah, they're often the biggest animals in their habitats. Again,
Hmm.
they don't, I believe that even though they're domesticated, camels tend to be kept semi-wild.
Yeah. Yep.
So they're not like in a pen. They are like roaming around out in the open, but they are like fenced off in a
Yeah.
space.
I think also like some reindeer that have been domesticated are kept similarly. Like a
Yeah.
lot of animals that humans have kept taken care of are kept this way, where they're allowed to live mostly like they would, but we just have access to them when we need them.
Yeah. And in those environments, yeah, these tend to be the biggest animals around. They've got all sorts of famous adaptations. These camels tend to have long eyelashes, hairy ears, and sealable nostrils. They
Hmm.
can close their nostrils, all of which are adaptations to keep sand from getting into their various face holes. They also famously have very tough mouths. Like just their lips and tongue and mouth tissue is very sturdy.
I've heard it called leathery.
Yeah, and that this allows them to eat basically any plants. They'll chomp
Hmm.
on cactuses and thorny plants, very dry plants. They are herbivores, but they are going after plants that most other herbivores would not either be able to chew or would choose not to because they're
Yes.
covered in spikes.
Yeah, I've seen videos of a camel just grabbing onto a cactus and just slowly chewing it until it disappears into the mouth.
Yep.
No, like, I have to do something about these spines. I have to like process. Just I'm gonna eat this like any other herbivore would eat any other leaf.
Yes. They are also capable of withstanding extreme temperature fluctuations and not just like surviving it, but similar to what you were just describing with the plants, being totally okay with it.
Yeah.
It's like 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and the camels are like, sure, a,
Yep.
a nice day for
Yeah.
them.
It's insane.
And one of the most famous attributes of these animals is that they are extraordinarily good at conserving water.
Hmm.
Camels can go months at a time without water. They can sustain dehydration to the point of losing 25% of their body weight. That's like if you weigh 200 pounds, that's losing 50 pounds of water.
Yep.
One paper that I was reading said 15% is usually fatal for most mammals. And camels can make it down to 25% without obvious discomfort. They're just like not even like, oh, you're wasting away, but technically you're still alive. Comfortably and healthily surviving 25% loss of water weight.
Yeah, yeah, because like usually when you hear about them being good at conserving water, it's all the ways they can like get water and store water and all that. But yeah, they can also do really well with when water isn't available.
Mm-hmm. They have their red blood cells are apparently part of this. They have uniquely, I think, among any animals, maybe just among mammals, they have oval shaped red blood cells
Uh-huh.
that can swell up to 2.5 times their normal size, which your red blood cells would break if they tried to do that. Camels are also extremely good at reabsorbing water. So like their
Mhm.
kidneys are excellent at getting as much water out. One source that I read described their urine as thick and syrupy,
Yep. Yep. That's what I heard.
and their poop is, quote, so desiccated that it may be used for fuel immediately.
Yeah, these are just
You-
briquettes.
yeah, that's just a chunk of carbon. Bactrian camels, both wild and domesticated, because they live at high altitudes, have also been known to eat snow as a water source, which most
Yeah,
animals can't do.
that's awesome.
And of course, the humps. One of the most famous anatomical features of camels, these big humps on their backs. These are giant stores of fat. So, this is fatty tissue that builds up within the hump, which is a store of energy and various biomolecules that are built into the fat. The old sort of misconception is that the humps store water, which isn't literally true. There's not like liquid water in there, but some of the molecular components of water do get incorporated into the fatty tissue. So they're kind of storing water in there, but really they're just storing energy stores of fat.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that it's the idea that it was a storage of water because looking at it as this is an extra structure for them to survive in the desert rather than this is how they're storing their fat, which is
Yes.
a big part of what's going on.
Yeah. The thing with the humps are for storage, but they've been noted to be good at dissipating heat. So like a sail, and we see like animals with horns will use them for dissipating heat when they get overheated. But I've also heard it described particularly for desert dwelling like dromedaries, because Bactrian camels are very hairy. They're pretty woolly animals. Dromedaries especially tend to be pretty short furred, and I've heard it described that putting all the fat in one place helps the rest of the body not be overheated. Right? It's
Yeah.
like tying your jacket around your waist instead of actually
Yeah.
wearing it.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Is yeah, you're going to have enough fat to survive, and the average animal like us stores it throughout the body. You know,
Mm-hmm.
a lot on the belly, but the thighs, the around the upper arms. But that's insulation. That's
Yes.
keeping heat in, and in the desert, that's no good.
Mm-hmm. Dromedary humps can apparently be up to 80 pounds of fatty tissue.
Ridiculous.
And there's also been a ton of genetic research into camels that have found rapid evolution in various genes associated with metabolism and water absorption and DNA repair and immune. They've got all of these genetic specializations that seem to be helpful in allowing them to survive these conditions. Bactrian camels and dromedaries are, again, of course, domesticated. Bactrian camels were domesticated by 5,000 years ago. So, not nearly the earliest of our domesticated animals, but pretty far back.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then dromedaries were domesticated by around 3,000 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
So, these are both species that we've been using for thousands of years in ancient times and still today. These camels are very important for rural life and nomadic life in various parts of Africa and Asia. They've been used for all sorts of different purposes. One thing that I read noted that at some points in the past, camels were also used in combat, specifically because they scare horses.
Yep. I think I've heard that before.
I think it's their smell. I think that's what they were describing, is something about the scent of a camel makes horses uncomfortable.
Well, and in fairness to the horses, as you should be.
Yeah, we'll get to that. we will talk about some of that here in just a little bit.
Like, don't want to make it seem like the horses are being unreasonable.
No, I also don't want to fight a camel.
If I was able to identify the smell of a camel at distance, I would leave too.
Agreed. And of course, camels are just exceptionally useful pack animals for those habitats. They like you use camels in places that a horse doesn't work in
Yes.
that environment. I remember hearing, I think this was when I was in the Middle East many years ago, hearing a story. I don't remember. This might have been, I don't know if this was a true story or if it was whatever, but the basic gist of it was a camel rider and a horse rider racing across the desert. And the
Mhm.
explanation that the horse wins the race, but then immediately dies of exhaustion. And the
Yes.
camel finishes the race and then turns around and makes the walk back.
Yep. Yep.
They are just so. This is the animal you want if you have to
Mhm.
navigate the desert or the dry steppes, these environments where they are just so exquisitely adapted.
Well, it's like having the right vehicle for the right terrain. Where, like,
Yeah.
a Ferrari's great on asphalt. Anywhere else, it is no good. But then, you get a four-wheel drive vehicle out in the woods, and it's just eating up the place because that's what it's built to do.
So, Africa, Asia, across the Middle East, we've got our old world humped camels. Over here in the Americas, specifically in South America, we have our New World camels, our lamines. These include two domesticated species, llamas, scientific name Llama glama,
Yep.
and alpacas, Llama pacos.
It's just so good.
And then there are also two wild species, guanacos, Llama guanaco, and vicuñas, Llama vicuña. it's
This
fantastic.
whole branch of life, whoever was your patron saint of naming, you nailed it.
This was, I don't know who named all of these camel species, but I could just imagine some scientist sitting there like coming up with writing out names, and their like partner who's just like a teacher or runs a business, something totally different, is just like, no one's gonna know that. No one's gonna know how to
Yep.
pronounce that. Call it Camelus dromedaries and move on, and everyone will know what you're talking about.
The image I got was similar, of like someone being like, "Oh, we could call it," and then giving the Latinized description of long-necked, high back, whatever
Yes.
description they would give, and he goes, what did the people call them? A llama, you say? Well, then, how do you spell that?
Let's get lunch. We're
Yep.
done. Genetic evidence suggests that guanacos are the wild ancestors of llamas,
Cool.
and vicuñas are the wild ancestors of alpacas. This is a little bit more complicated than that because there has been a whole bunch of like crossbreeding. There's also some suggestion that vicuñas themselves might have a history of domestication, but
Yeah.
simply put, we've got guanacos and vicuñas, both wild species, which are the ancestors of the domesticated llamas and alpacas.
Nice.
Guanacos and vicuñas are both native to high altitude steppes and scrublands of the Andes Mountains of South America. Similar to the Old World camels, they have long legs and they have long necks, although they aren't. Old World camels tend to have these like droopy, curvy necks,
Yes.
whereas llamas and the New World camels tend to just hold their necks upward, more
Yeah.
like you would imagine a giraffe or a gazelle or something.
Yeah, they look very rigid in comparison because you've just got
Yes.
this big U bend and a camel neck. Alpacas look very alert.
New World camels are also much smaller. Guanacos are usually between 100 and 150 kilograms, so 200, 300 pounds, and they're only about 3 or 4 feet at the shoulder, a meter at the shoulder, which is a big animal,
Oh, yeah.
but nowhere near the size of their cousins across the pond.
Like I had cousins who raised llamas, and
Mhm.
I'm eye level with them. Like just
Yes.
about, we're like about even eye level face to face. So still decent sized animals, but not as intimidating even as a horse is when I'm next to a horse.
Yes. And vicuñas are smaller. They are only about 3 feet tall. They're like 30 to 60 kilograms. And they also tend to live at higher elevations.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Both of these species, similar to the other camels, are adapted to extreme environments, although in this case, it's mostly extreme cold environments, as well as eating nutrient poor vegetation, navigating barren, rocky landscapes. These animals do not handle heat very well,
Yeah.
but they are still extreme habitat specialists, right? They live up in the cold mountains. They are doing something unusual. Llamas and alpacas were domesticated somewhere around 5 to 6,000 years ago. So
Okay.
they actually appear to have been domesticated first among
Yeah.
all of our modern camels. To this day, both groups are used as pack animals as well. They're bred for meat, and very famously, they are bred for wool.
Yeah.
Much like with sheep, you get llama wool, you can get alpaca wool. You can also, there is like vicuña wool as well.
Oh.
But the domesticated ones, this is one of the big things that they are bred for.
Yes, indeed.
Interestingly, unlike many other domesticated animals, from what I read, it sounds like there isn't very much written history of llama and alpaca domestication. So we don't actually know as much about it because this is an oral tradition,
Yeah.
which on the one hand is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that that's like you're an alpaca farmer and you learned like a trick, like a tip for how to handle an unusual situation, and you learned it from your grandpa, and that the idea that that trick was discovered by an ancestor 5,000 years ago who is like, oh man, I'm gonna tell my kids about this because this is gonna really help them out, and that's just been continuing forever. That's such a cool feature of our species.
Yeah. Well, and like being 5 to 6,000 years ago, what means that like if I have my dates right in my head, we had llamas and alpacas almost as long as we've had cats.
Yeah. Yeah, this is an old group. On the other hand, that long history of mostly oral tradition does also mean that most of that tradition is lost now because colonialism. European colonizers came in and they destroyed or fragmented most of those populations. So a lot of that information is sadly lost now, even though the breeding and keeping of these animals does continue and is still like economically very important in many parts of the Andes. Altogether, we've got 7 species of modern camelids, 3 in the old world, 4 in the new world, 4 of which in total are domesticated, 3 of which are wild. They share a general body plan: long neck, long legs. They share these adaptations to extreme, difficult environments. They also share some other anatomical features, starting with their skulls, which I think camel skull, like a big like a dromedary skull, might be the most unexpectedly terrifying animal skull that there is. Camel skulls are horrifying. They are so scary. So artiodactyls in general, like these even-toed ungulates, tend to have pretty specialized dentition, right? The basic mammal formula for teeth is incisors up front, some pointy canines, and then premolars and molars that are variously sharp or crushing teeth. Artiodactyls, in many cases, have exaggerated the back teeth for chewing, but then really simplified the front teeth. So if you think about a cow or a deer skull, what you have is big old teeth in the back, a gap in front of those teeth, which we call a diastema, and then lower incisors, which are good for snipping, but the upper incisors are lost. There are no upper teeth in the front. And they've lost their canines. This is pretty typical of a lot of these groups. Cattle are like this, deer are like this, although I think they kept the lower canines. But this is kind of the general picture. Camels are also like that. So if you look at a camel skull, you will see big crushing teeth in the back, a big gap, and then lower incisors for snipping and scooping food, but also the upper incisors. They have one pair of upper incisors that remain, which are shifted backwards slightly and are caniniform,
Yep.
large and pointy like a canine. Camels also retain the upper and lower pairs of canines, which are large and pointy like canines, and the first pair of premolars on the top and bottom of the jaw are shifted forward and are canine shaped.
Yep.
So a camel skull is like if you took a cow skull and put 5 pairs of canines in it.
Yes.
They are very scary looking skulls, and they also don't not use them.
Yeah, no, these aren't just for, this isn't like a musk deer where you got canines and like
Yes.
you kind of use them, but they're mostly for show.
I was reading, this is a quote from a veterinary information website that was describing camel anatomy. End quote. This array of canine teeth, 3 in each upper jaw and 2 in each lower jaw, coupled with the unique ability of the camel to open the mouth widely, provides the camel with a formidable tool for offensive and defensive behaviors, so handlers should be continually alert.
Yep.
This is also true of llamas and alpacas. It tends not to be quite as exaggerated. I think that maybe like I think the premolars aren't canine shaped. So llamas and alpacas, I think, have fewer and smaller canine shaped teeth, but they
Yes.
still have. And in llamas in particular, the males have big canines that they use for, biting each other and putting on a show and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and, like I've heard one of the ways males bite each other is to basically effectively try to castrate one another by going for the genitals and trying to maim.
That wouldn't surprise me. Apparently, camels also have a habit of biting and shaking.
Like a Rottweiler.
Yes. Oof. Camels are like the Mad Max version of a horse.
Yeah. Yep.
It lives in the desert, and if you look at it twice funny, it's gonna tear your arms off. They're so scary.
Yeah, well, and they're big, so like not only is this skull surprisingly scary for an herbivore, it's massive. Like if you put that, if you have a desk and you put that on your desk, you don't have room to work at your desk anymore.
Yes.
Also, they're weird and swoopy. Like they've got this just, they're weirdly shaped. Like this is much more of like a, if you know skulls, this is going to be weird for you. Like I'm sure for other people this might just, all skulls look weird, but they're weird.
Yeah. Well, because like a horse skull has this like nice gradual slope from the back to the front. Camels have like a front windshield thing going on.
Yeah. And I think that's to make room for their big schnoz, their complicated nose. They have like that desert nose that a lot of animals have to filter out stuff and retain moisture.
They also have split lips.
Yes.
And each side of the lips is muscular and can move independently.
Absolutely.
So they don't have a trunk, but like a rhino has a very muscular, flexible upper lip. Camels have 2 of those.
Yep.
Which is also a very strange thing to do. It makes me think of the people who've gotten their tongues split. And then they can like move the parts of the tongue independent. It's like that, but with your lips. It's very strange.
Yeah, they're just so supremely specialized, and it is evident throughout every part of their anatomy. It's not just that they've got a hump. Everything. You said you were going to talk about feet later, so I didn't want to.
Oh, you can bring it up now if you want. We'll get into more of it in detail, and I'll mention that. But yeah, you can mention it here.
But like, their feet are specialized to splay out in the sand. They've got those pads on their chest and arms to lay on hot sand. Like every part of a camel you look at, I've heard their hips are weird to be able to maneuver in the sand and balance in shifting dunes.
they can also bend their legs underneath their body. Like
Yeah.
if you see a camel lay down, they bend the legs under the body like a cat and like
Yes.
rest on them, which most artiodactyls can't do. You mentioned that it's called a pedestal. That
Yep.
specifically, this is dromedaries. There is this thick pad of tissue on the chest, the sternum, and they lay down, and it not only is it thick to avoid burning yourself on the sand, but it keeps the rest of the belly elevated up off
Mm-hmm.
the sand. So you've got like circulation down there. I have heard, I did not come across this in any of my looking stuff up for this episode, but I have heard anecdotally that when dromedaries fight, they are known to try to
Yes.
use that thick chest pad to crush the heads of their opponents.
Yep. That and like I've heard that for like opponents, and also like if an animal's the predator's attacking them or something, and it gets
Mhm.
under them, they will just go down. Just I have a
Yeah.
piston on my chest, and I will crush you. I am a hydraulic press of an animal.
Also, we'll talk more about their legs and their feet later because it's a very fun part of their evolution. But another quote from this vet website says, in camels, all 4 feet and legs may become formidable weapons. The front legs may strike out in any direction. The rear legs have the ability to reach forward to the extent of scratching the head. Thus, no place is safe around an untrained camel compared with, say, a horse.
Yeah, exactly. They don't just have the back kick; they're just going to kick you.
Yes. It's so funny. I think that camels wouldn't seem so dramatic and extreme if horses didn't also exist.
Well, if they weren't our default mounted animal in so many other situations.
Yeah, this really is like you made a monster horse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny. Speaking of stuff on their face, apparently, I only read this in one place, alpacas and vicuñas have ever-growing incisors, like rodents.
Oh.
So that's
Yeah.
cool.
Huh.
Also, male dromedaries have a pouch of tissue on the roof of their mouth, which is called a dula, which they can inflate and protrude from the mouth. It looks like they're blowing a bubble with like bubble gum.
Yes, it's a
But it's-
bubble gum is like the same texture as the inside of your cheek.
Yes. It's just it just inflates out the side of the mouth. They do this when they are angry, agitated, frustrated, in rut, or aroused.
Yep. Just, it's an all-around mouth pouch.
Yes. I'm feeling big feelings. Here's my mouth pouch.
It feels like those ads for clothing of like, there's no scenario where this isn't an appropriate thing to wear.
Yes.
Bring out your dewlap whenever the moment strikes you.
And while we are on the topic of camel mouths, the other thing that they do is they spit.
Yep.
Now, this actually does bring us to an interesting feature of camels because the spit is not spit. Camels are not ruminants, but they do ruminate. So most artiodactyls fit into this group called ruminants. Cows are the very famous example. They have 4 chambers to their stomachs, and part of their digestion is ruminating, which means they swallow their food, it gets digested in the early chamber of the stomach, and then they regurgitate it back up into the mouth and chew it more, right? That's chewing their cud. So it kind of goes back and forth. This lets them really work on this tough food that they're eating. Camels are not ruminants, but they do the same thing. They have independently evolved this feature. They have a 3-chambered stomach, but the chambers are not the same chambers. It is an independent development of multi-chambered stomachs, and they also chew their cud. They also regurgitate up into the mouth and keep chewing. That's what they're spitting.
Yep.
When llamas do this, alpacas do this, every member of this family does this. When they are angry or frustrated, they will spit regurgitant. out of their mouth at whatever they're angry at.
Yep. And I've heard it is so supremely nasty to
I
get
would
hit by
believe
it.
it. Yeah. Because it's basically vomit. It's
Yep.
basically just throwing up on you.
Except it's projectiled in a very
Yes.
specialized way. The way my cousin described it was if you had a loogie in your mouth and like a big and then sneezed it out of your mouth. Like not spit it.
Yeah.
It is like it's forceful and so they can hit you at a distance and then you just get covered.
Yeah, I think I read that I think this was llamas can spit up to like 10 feet
Yeah.
away and they're pretty accurate with it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, it's gross. Once again, these are Mad Max horses. This is just
Yeah.
everything about these animals says, "Do not mess with me. I'm a monster horse." Except for guanacos and vicuñas, which unfortunately for them are also extremely cute.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
so llamas and alpacas are just adorable. They're
Yeah,
just
they
so
really
fluffy and
are.
adorable.
They just got this like curly hair that just frames this very cute face.
Yeah, they do. They look like cartoon animals.
Yeah. Yep.
Also, like I said, their feet are so strange. More on that here in a little bit. But I'm going to work that into because we're going to talk about their evolution again. In the second half of this episode, now that we've gotten to know our modern camels and some of what makes them unusual, let's work through the fossil record because camels not only are really famous for their modern species, camels have a fantastic fossil record.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll go through that after this musical interlude. One of the most fascinating things about camels when we look at their fossil record and their evolutionary history is that almost their entire evolutionary story takes place in the one continent where they are conspicuously absent today, and that
Mm-hmm.
is our continent, me and Will, North America. Camels first evolved in North America, and it took them a long time to leave North America. This is also true of the broader group, Tylopoda, this group that the camel family belongs to. There are a bunch of other ancient groups that are maybe related to camels, maybe early members of the Tylopod group or the camelid group. I'm going to go through some of those just to give us a sense of sort of where camels first came from. This has been historically very confusing, partly for the same reason that it always is, that early on in the evolution of a group, they haven't evolved a lot of their distinctive features yet, so it can be difficult to distinguish one group from the other. But also, for a long time, Tylopoda was a group that paleontologists would just kind of dump fossils that they didn't know what to do with. It was
Yes.
kind of a wastebasket group, so that's also been like sorting through work for researchers for a long time. So there's a handful of these groups that are maybe camels. One of these are the Oromoricidae. These are known from the Eocene, starting around 40 million years ago, here in North America. These are considered to probably be either close relatives of camels or early members of the camel family. These do not look like camels very much at all. They have short legs, four-toed feet, hooves, unlike modern camels. They also apparently, the radius and ulna are fused in an unusual way.
Huh.
This group, despite, are questionably being camels, include a genus called Protylopus, which is often cited as the earliest known camel. This lived about 46 million years ago. It is very small, 25 kilograms.
Oh.
So 50, 60 pounds, slender teeth that would suggest it was eating soft plants. Another very similar group, similar age, also North America, are Homacodontids, which are small. They were described as rabbit-sized, and compared to modern muntjacs or water deer, just these tiny little fast-running herbivores. This seems to kind of be the starting stock for the tylopod lineage, is small rabbit to deer-like little herbivores. Homacodontidae also includes a species called Gagadon mini monstrum, which was named in 2014. It is named after Lady Gaga and her fans, which she calls her little monsters.
Oh yeah, there you go.
And then there's one other group that bears mentioning here, also from North America, a long history in the fossil record, called protoceratids. These are a very famous group of deer-like animals, and what they're famous for is they have horns on their head like we think of a lot of modern like cattle and stuff, but they also had nose horns.
Yeah, they did.
And some of them are like paired nose horns, and some they branch and are kind of the shape of the letter Y. Some of them had like 2 or 3 or 4 pairs of horns. They had this really wild ornamentation going on atop their heads. We probably talked about these in episode 140 when we talked about horns and antlers.
We sure did. These are some of my favorites because their heads look like they are meant for smaller animals to turn them into giant slingshots. Like they just so many projections and weird displays going on.
This group, protoceratids, they've sort of bounced back and forth over time from different studies. Sometimes they've been classified as tylopods, relatives of camels. Other times they're classified as ruminants, so more closely related to deer and antelope and such. So these might be camel cousins, but it remains unclear. So we've got a handful of these early groups that are maybe camels, maybe related to camels. True camels, fossils that are classified as early camelids, show up during the Eocene, and from there have an excellent fossil record. There are over 100 species known. In many places, they were some of the most abundant herbivores of their time. Once camels got started, they really were a major group throughout North America. They begin with an ancient species named Pobratherium, which is maybe the earliest known camel. Again, Protylopus is also called the earliest camel. There's a few of them here. Pobratherium, I've seen more commonly assigned to true camelid lineage. It lived around 46 million years ago across Western North America. This is a sheep-sized animal, about 3 feet tall, very numerous in some places, varying habitats, and teeth that suggest a generalized diet. So it was probably living in a similar niche as modern deer or gazelles, things like that. It's been described as probably very llama-like in its overall structure, deer-like in its habits, sheep-sized, and some of them are known with bite marks on them. So they seem to have also been common prey for some other creatures.
Delicious.
The one source that I found that mentioned the bite marks noted that they are entilodont bite marks. Which, listen, send in your request
Sorry,
now
buddy.
for an entilodont episode. We haven't done that one yet. There is another species around this time named Pobrodon, which is another one of these, seems to be early member of this camel lineage, also small. This is the origins of camels as a family, is a bunch of early members and close cousins that are all small deer or sheep or even rabbit-sized, little generalized herbivores.
Similar to what we see in horses. This is very common with a lot of these kinds of groups, that you start small and then we see the big members come later.
Yes. Moving into the late Oligocene, starting around 30 million years ago and into the Miocene, the camel family expands, and we start seeing these different specialized groups. You get your stenomylenes, which are sometimes called gazelle camels. These are very small with very slender long legs and slender long necks that seem to have been runners, like little, running around like gazelles. Oxydactylus, which are sometimes called giraffe camels, though they were not gigantic, but they did have quite long necks. Again, tall and slender, somewhat similar to modern guanacos down in South America. You also get a group called Florida tragulines, which have these very strange long snouts, long and narrow. I have seen them described in scientific papers as tubular snouts.
Yeah.
And one reference described them as almost anteater-like.
Oh.
We don't know why they had this. We don't know what they were doing.
Fish eaters.
Obviously, it was a long snout with a big gap, a big diastema, and then obviously some chompy teeth up front. And then they would death roll. And then there's a whole bunch of these other groups. So as we get into the Miocene epoch, we start to see these shifts, this development of new diverse groups. And among these, we start to see some of these familiar camel features appearing in various places. Obviously, the long legs and the long necks. Also, their high-crowned teeth. Modern camels, the molars are very deep, like horse molars. Some of these ancient species, I think Oxydactylus was one of these, have been noted to have that large upper incisor that is kind of canine-shaped. We start to see the longer snouts. Obviously, some of them, wildly long, but camels today are pretty long-snouted. The side toes are being reduced. Modern camels are standing on just their middle two toes. In the Miocene epoch, these various groups of camels are found all across North America. North America was the continent of camels. There are over a dozen different genera that have been identified during this time period from this area. Mainly, these seem to have continued to be mixed feeders, eating grasses, but also shrubbery, leaves, basically eating all sorts of plants. They've been noted in many cases as seeming to live on the edges of forest and grassland, where they could kind of go in and out and take advantage of both categories of vegetation.
Yeah, there's a white-tailed deer here in North America that are famous for being specialized for that. So that's, once again, very deer-like lifestyles.
And that is something that they're often noted that, gazelles never made it to North America. And this is, I believe, unless I've got my information wrong, before deer showed up in North America. Camels were kind of doing that. They were doing the deer niche. They were doing that gazelle niche of being that sort of medium-sized, long-legged animal that could feed on plants, middle to low, eat a bunch of different plants, live in a bunch of different places. Very sort of generalized large herbivore.
And even though we're calling them camels because they're in the overall group, would have looked more like llamas a lot of the times. They're not showing the signs of our desert specialists.
Yes, they were living not in extreme habitats, as far as we can tell, right? They're living in forests and grasslands and all over the place. So most of these, especially at this early stage, would not have looked very much like modern camels like we think of in the old world. But yes, much more like vicuñas and guanacos, llamas and alpacas.
Like, they've got that camely face in a lot. You can see the family resemblance, but much more relaxed in their adaptations.
These are chill camels.
Yep.
Right. The apocalypse hadn't happened yet, so they hadn't, they hadn't run out of water.
This is Mad Max at the beginning of the first movie where he still has a family and he hasn't gone all road warrior yet.
Yes, exactly. Right. What's the bad guy's name in Fury Road? I never remember his name.
Immortan Joe.
Immortan Joe, right? Immortan Joe hasn't started hoarding the water yet. These are like chill. These are pre-apocalypse camels. As the Miocene continues, one of the major shifts that happens all around the world is grasslands spread and become the major category of biomes that they are today, with savannas and prairies and these open habitats. This corresponds with a bunch of adaptations for open area living in a lot of different groups, camels included. It is around this time that the camel family makes changes to their legs and feet that continue to this day. So, artiodactyls are even-toed ungulates. And what that means, even-toed, again, they have an even number of toes. The weight is supported by the two central toes working together as a central pillar. And ungulates refers to the structure of their feet.
Mm-hmm.
We humans hold our feet in what is called a plantigrade stance. Plantigrade means that the whole foot from the toes to the heel is flat on the ground when we walk around. A lot of other animals, like dogs and cats, are digitigrade. They stand on the digits. The heel is held up off the ground, and the toes are laying flat on the ground. This is like when you get up on your toes to try to reach something on the top shelf, and you raise your heel up off the ground.
Or like sneaky walk.
Yeah, this is your sneaky walk. A lot of animals walk like that. Ungulates walk on their unguals. The ungule is the word for the last toe bone. So ungulates walk like ballerinas. That
Literally.
the full foot is straight into the ground, and you are only walking on that final bone of the toe. This is part of what the whole function of hooves is. Hooves are there to help stabilize that you're walking on sticks.
Yes.
Camels today are not unguligrade.
Nope.
They're digitigrade. They have those splayed toes, and their whole digit lays it across the ground. So they are digitigrade more the way that we think of, a dog or a cat with the toes splayed out. Modern camels also don't have hooves. They have nails.
Yeah.
Like a toenail on that sort of splayed foot. And that the splaying of the foot is also supported by these big foot pads. Kind of like, if you look at the bottom of your dog or cat's feet, they've got those beans on the bottom. Camels have big beans on the bottom of the feet to help support the weight of the body.
Yeah.
But they started out like normal artiodactyls. Eocene and Oligocene camel, early members of these groups, have much more typical artiodactyl limbs. They appear to be unguligrade, walking on the very tips of those toe bones. And the shape of the foot suggests they probably also had hooves, which means that camels are secondarily digitigrade.
Yep.
From their artiodactyl ancestors, and we start to see that shift through the Miocene. We see these changes to the foot structure, evidence that they are returning to digitigrade stand, right? Like lower, splaying out those toes, and with the adjustment to the shape of the foot, probably also losing their hooves. I also mentioned earlier that they have an unusual limb structure. Camels can bend their legs underneath their bodies to lay down. And all of this talk of camel legs and foot structure brings me to another really weird thing that camels do. Modern camels walk weird.
Yeah.
This is another one of those things that sets them apart, again, from something more familiar like horses. Modern camels are unique in the ways that they use what is called a pacing gait or a lateral gait. If you think of most quadrupedal animals, the way that they walk, often they move two legs at the same time. And it's usually the front right and the back left at the same time, and then the front left and the back right. If you crawl around on the floor on your hands and knees, this is probably how you're going to default to walking around. You're going to move one back leg and one front leg diagonal from each other. This is sometimes called a diagonal gait.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because it's very stable, right? You're
Yes.
supporting yourself on both sides. But a pacing gait or a lateral gait moves both right limbs at the same time and then both left limbs at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
There are some animals that do this occasionally. Giraffes are notable for sometimes moving this way. Cheetahs, I saw noted as animals that will sometimes move this way.
Oh.
But camels do this very regularly, and uniquely among modern animals, camels run that way. That giraffes will do this, but when they need to like get speed, they gallop, they
Yes.
bound, they run. Camels run and both right feet and then both left feet, and it's so weird. It's such an unusual thing to see.
Well, it's the two people in the camel costume just didn't coordinate.
Yes, they're not coordinating.
My left or your left? Same left.
This is really interesting because it gives them a longer stride, and the benefit of moving this way is that you don't have to worry about accidentally kicking your front foot.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
You can trip yourself if you're if you're doing diagonal gait. This way, you don't have to worry about that, but it's also far less stable
Mhm.
because all the weight is over on one side and then all the weight's over on the other side. It's also less maneuverable. Some researchers have suggested that those splayed toes, that digitigrade stance, might help to mitigate that instability a little bit.
Yes.
So, which of these came first? But that return to that digitigrade posture and those big foot pads and the splayed toes might be correlated with this unusual walking style. Also, and this is pure anecdote, my sample size is like 4. But while I was learning about this, I did go onto YouTube to try to see if I could find videos of camels running and like, oh, do they actually run that way? And I found one video of a pair of camels just like out doing their own thing, running side by side in that right, left way. And it's very strange. But I also found multiple videos of camel races, like horse races with riders. And those camels all ran like horses.
Galloped.
They galloped the way that you would expect. And I wonder if that is a stability issue.
Yeah.
That with an extra 150 pounds or whatever on your back, does the lateral gait not work at high speeds? Because now you're just going to tip over because you've got this extra weight on you. So then they gallop like horses. I do not know, but that's my running hypothesis. If there's any camel racers out there, you let me know.
Well, it also makes me wonder how the speeds compare between a running camel without anyone out in the wild and a racing camel. Of how often are you needing to run as fast as a racing camel is being driven to run out in the desert, where there's not a lot to chase you out there. It's not often that you're having to flee actively from something out in the desert.
Yeah. This lateral gait I've seen described as arguably more efficient. And obviously it's you're not going to trip yourself and you have longer strides, but it isn't as maneuverable and it isn't as stable. So it might not be very good for running away from things or for running breakneck speed, but it is probably very good for keeping up a pace for a long time.
Yeah, it's a travel run, not a evasive run.
Yes. Starting in the Miocene, we see these fossil camels developing modern style camel legs and feet. We see multiple different groups independently developing similar but not identical versions of the splayed toes. By the end of the Miocene, pretty much all existing camels in this family had very modern style feet, and researchers have suggested we're probably moving in this lateral gait. There's even at least one trackway from a camel known as Protolabus, which has been interpreted as potentially showing this left, right walking style.
Okay.
So this seems to be another one of those things that likely just all camels were doing that all across North America by the end of the Miocene.
Interesting.
This is probably, at least in part, an adaptation to more open habitats and more open environments. Although it's also been pointed out by researchers that camels, some of their open habitat features show up before the true spread of grasslands.
Yeah.
So they may have already been existing in more open habitats. And then even after the spread of grasslands, most of them stay as mixed feeders.
Yeah.
And we're probably still existing on the sort of borders between these habitats. So they don't seem to have taken to like full savanna lifestyle the way we think of with horses or gazelles and things like that.
Interesting. Does bring up the question of why then was this new gate beneficial?
Yeah. Was it something about the way you were walking? Was it that your feet started getting weird and then this was like a secondary effect of that? We don't know.
Well, and it makes, was there someone else doing something even more the deer style or something that so you needed to start adapting to a slightly different or more specialized or whatever it
Yeah.
was to compete?
Well, I mean, at this time, North America was also home to horses.
Yeah.
And they did take to the open habitats. So it might be that the camels stuck at the border so as to avoid direct competition with horses out in the open areas and, I don't know, tapirs in the forests or something.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So camels got weird even while they were still very abundant and in all sorts of different habitats.
Yeah, what we often describe as feet that are meant for the desert in modern camels, it seems like they got feet at least similar to that before,
Yes.
at least while many of them were not in deserts. Some of them might have been, but plenty weren't.
Yes. And this has been a big question in camel evolution is which of those modern features are adaptations to harsh environments and which of them did they already have and then it turned out to be really helpful for surviving in harsh environments.
Yes.
It may be that camels and horses, various times arrived at the desert and horses fell over in the sand, whereas camels had those splayed feet and could walk across the sand. And that opened the gate for them to adapt more to desert environments or something like that.
It's, are you shaped like this because you live in the desert, or do you live in the desert because you're shaped like a camel?
Yes, exactly. Speaking of shapes of camels, another thing that we start to see in the Miocene is camels begin to get big.
Yeah.
Before this time, right, most camels were relatively, they're llama sized, they're guanaco sized, they're sheep or deer sized. It is through the Miocene that we start to see big ones. Various groups that achieved sizes similar to modern camels, and some bigger than that. You've got groups like Apicamelus, which had stilt-like legs and a long neck that has been described as being able to hold its head about 10 feet up off the ground, which is quite tall. You've got a genus such as Titanotylopus, which I have seen described as having had a shoulder height of about 3 meters. 10 or 11 feet at the shoulder, and with estimated weights of over 2 tons. Gigantic, enormous camel, roughly camel-shaped camel. And there is also a genus Megatylopus, which I think, I don't know that we actually have a lot of fossil remains of Megatylopus, but I've often seen it cited as standing up to 14 feet at full height.
Wow.
And that is giraffe sized.
Yep.
Now you are standing like a giraffe with your long legs and your big long head. Some of these big camels I've seen just reconstructed as more llama shaped. So the height in part is coming from that long vertical neck. But some, like Titanotylopus, I typically see reconstructed like modern camels, with the neck sort of slung forward and just absolutely enormous.
And just plucking small animals off the ground with their horrifying mouths.
Well, and they did have giant canines.
Yep.
They have the camel. These are camels. All the stuff we said about camels before, about how there's no safe place to be near a camel, it was that, but 10 feet at the shoulder.
Yeah, there's no safe place to be next to this camel, and no walls can protect you. Like,
I have been asked and have asked people who know better than me if these camels would have spit.
yep.
And my answer, and the answer I have received from people who study camels, is I don't see why not.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a common feature. It is an emergent feature of their digestive process. So I have also been asked how far, what is the safe distance to be standing in the presence of a 14-foot tall camel? And to that, I do not have an answer.
And it would just be it's surely it had to have been getting hit by like a kickball sized water balloon. just drenched with
That's a real, that's
bile.
for like turning away mammoths. You're just like, get out of here. Ugh. Well, it's like that diagram that goes around every now and then of the sauropod throwing up.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what force would it hit the ground with?
How close to terminal velocity does this reach?
Yeah. These giant camels were probably high browsers, right? Feeding in the trees like we see with modern giraffes. They also had the broad toes, they had the big canines, they were camels. Some have even suggested the presence of a hump on some of these giant
Ooh.
camels, but that doesn't seem to be a consensus.
Yeah.
One paper that I saw referenced was some researchers have suggested a hump based on the neural spines of the vertebrae.
Mm-hmm.
But just looking at the skeleton, those, and I didn't read that paper, so I don't know what their argument was. The vertebrae look like the vertebrae that you see on like a bison.
Yeah.
So it's possible they had a hump the way that a bison has that big, muscly hump up around the shoulders that helps it lift its gigantic head. But whether or not any of these ancient camels had a hump like a dromedary,
Mm-hmm.
unclear.
Well, and surely, the evolution of the hump had to be you just tend to store a fat up on the back a bit more. And then, so like a bunch of these might have had proto humps.
Yeah, or it might have started like a bison situation,
Yeah,
and then shifted
exactly.
from there. Mm-hmm.
And you get animals where it's like, oh yeah, there's a big line of fat along this part of the body, and that's where this animal stores a bunch of it, like how we store ours around the belly. Not all
Mm-hmm.
animals store it there, so they might have just been like, the back turned out to be where camels stored a lot of it, and then some of them went crazy with that idea.
Well, and it's tough because we already know that some of the weird features of modern camels showed up very, very early. But our modern camels are also very strange animals.
Yes, they are.
And not all of our modern members of this family are shaped like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very tough to tell where that would have shown up. Speaking of our modern groups, around the middle of the Miocene is when genetic evidence predicts the split between Camelini, the group that would eventually give rise to the Old World camels, and Lamini, the one that would give rise to our South American camels. This split is estimated around 16 to 17 million years ago, which means this split happened in North America.
Yep.
Long before they moved, but eventually they did move. The first camels that are known from the fossil record outside of North America are in Europe around 7 million years ago, and they belong to a genus called Paracamelus. Similar camel remains have also been found in the high Arctic of Canada. So it seems around this time, 6 to 7 million years ago, at least this group of the Paracamelus camels crossed Beringia, episode 219, from North America into Eurasia. Paracamelus has been found in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And these are presumably the ancestors of our modern day Asian and African and Middle Eastern camels. Some researchers have even suggested that some of those adaptations to extreme environments in modern camels could be holdovers from Arctic ancestors.
Oh, yeah.
Although, again, that's tough to tease out, and it wouldn't explain llama and alpaca adaptations to their extreme habitats. Back in North America, around the same time, we see a genus called Hemiocenia, which are roughly llama shaped, but roughly horse sized. So more, 5-6 feet at the shoulder, half a ton. These are often interpreted as some of the earliest members of the Lamini lineage. And around 3 million years ago, these animals show up in South America. This is following the formation of the Isthmus of Panama and the Great American Biotic Interchange, episode 43, where South America and North America exchanged a bunch of critters. One of the things that South America got in the exchange were camels.
Yeah.
Hemiocenia and other members of the llama lineage. Hemiocenia is sometimes proposed as the ancestor of modern New World camels, but there are some other early llama members that may have made the same trip later on, and those might be the ancestors. But starting at 3 million years ago, South America was now available. So by the end of the Pliocene, camels had breached containment and made it into Eurasia and into South America.
Which, like you said, took a while.
Yeah. They were in North America for some 40 million years before they ever showed up anywhere else.
It's particularly interesting to me because they became so camel-like before ever getting to the places where they are now known to have adapted, that now we know they're them as they are and that they adapted to the lifestyles we know. So it has that very weird question of, were you living kind of like our moderns at all here, or was there a different reason you became camel shaped before spreading around the world?
And are our modern camels just not as weird as we think they are? Is that shape just good for all sorts of habitats and you just don't live in those habitats anymore?
It makes me think a lot of elephants, where when you think of an elephant, they seem like a very weird animal. But there was a time where that weird animal was a global phenomena, where we had elephants of various species, size, and adaptations all over the world. So maybe it's actually not that bizarre. It's just that nowadays we only have a handful, so it seems unique and weird.
Yeah. So by the end of the Pliocene epoch, camels are all over the place. Through the Pleistocene, they continue to diversify. All of our modern wild and major groups of camels today are thought to have diverged between 1 and 2 million years ago or so. Guanacos from vicuñas, dromedaries from Bactrian. But through the Pleistocene, through the Ice Age, they remain successful in multiple places. Here in North America, camels are still some of the iconic giant megafauna of the Ice Age. One of the most famous examples, probably the most famous of the Ice Age examples, is Camelops, which shows up around 3 million years ago and makes it all the way to the end of the Pleistocene. Camelops is quite large, similar in size to our big modern camels today. 2 meters or more at the shoulder, up to a ton in weight. These were big, full camels living here in North America. They lived alongside some of those other ones, like Titanotilopus, also made it into the Pleistocene. Camelops is extremely widespread. It's known all over North America, from Honduras in Central America up to Alaska. These were all over the continent. They are also very common. There are some Pleistocene fossil sites here in North America where Camelops makes up more than a third of the large mammal fossils. at those
Oh.
sites. So even into the Ice Age, the large camels were extremely widespread and abundant. Camelops, there's been a lot of debate over which group of camels Camelops is closest related to. These days, it seems like there's more evidence putting them as relatives to our old world camels, dromedaries and Bactrian, although, again, that's gone back and forth a bunch. There have been isotope studies that suggest that camelops went on long migrations across the continent, and there are even some trackways that indicate they may have traveled in small groups, like we see with modern camels. That
Cool.
wild camels, both New World and Old World, travel in small groups, and apparently, at least in the Old World, like dromedaries, the small groups are usually led by one male and then a
Right,
bunch of
yes.
females and juveniles. And at least a couple of these trackways, authors have noted one set of larger tracks among the
Oh,
trackway. So it's
yeah.
possible they traveled in very similar groups that we see in modern camels.
Neat.
Meanwhile, during the Pleistocene, we've got other fossils like Paleolama in South America. Once again, we're back. The closer we get to the present, the better the names become.
Mm-hmm.
Paleolama, which is also considered to be an ancestor to modern llamas and alpacas, possibly made their own trek down into South America because these are also known from both North America and South America. There are also at least two well known Old World camels from the Ice Age of Europe and Asia. These include Camelus morelli and Camelus knoblauchi, both of which are huge, estimated to have possibly been similar sizes as Titanotylopus and some of those really big ones. You know,
Whoa.
a ton or more, 2 to 3 meters at the shoulder. So Europe and Asia might also have had their giant camels during the Pleistocene as well. And then, of course, camels, most of them, met the same fate as most of the megafauna of the Pleistocene. At the end, almost every species of camel went extinct, just like almost every species of elephants and horses and rhinos. A lot of this diversity vanished, although the details of camel extinction are a little bit unclear because the timing is a little bit off.
Mm.
Camelops in North America is noted to, it seems to have gone extinct around 13,000 years ago, which is a few thousand years before a lot of the other megafauna go extinct. So something seems to have put camels in decline before that final pulse of extinction. Obviously, there was a lot of changing climate conditions at this time, and many researchers have suggested that these camels were just losing their habitats. The other part, naturally, is that humans were spreading around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they had something to do with it. And we do have butchered remains of camelops in North America and Camelus knoblauchi in Mongolia. So we do know that humans hunted and ate these camels.
Yep.
But what factors were the more or less involved in camel extinction, just like all the other Pleistocene extinctions, episode 25? Difficult to say, but it does seem like camels were an early loss, that they sort of petered out before that final loss of the rest of the megafauna. Although a paper came out, I think this was last year, that identified fossils as Paleolama from South America only about 3,500 years ago.
Wow.
So it's possible that some of these camels, along with some other megafauna, survived longer in some places.
Mm-hmm.
So camels are such a diverse and widespread group that it's difficult to nail down exactly what happened to them and what
Yeah.
happened to them in different places. But ultimately, they were mostly casualties of the late Pleistocene megafaunal extinctions.
Which is always, we've addressed this extinction with so many groups, but it's always just so, for me, it always puts it into perspective when we talk about it again, how devastating the megafaunal extinction was. We're like, yeah, camels were all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
minus Australia and Antarctica.
Yep.
And now we got them in two major pockets, three-ish, I guess, but like
Yeah.
really just isolated in a couple of relatively smaller areas with literally only a handful of species in each area.
Yeah. Well, and they also live in unusual places. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the only places that they were able to hang on were these very extreme environments where you get very, very few other large mammals like this.
Yep.
And is it that those were the habitats that just were less affected by these extinctions, either because the climate did, what more could it do to the desert,
Mm-hmm.
or if humans were a factor, were these the places that humans just weren't as adept at getting to and putting stresses on these populations? Or is it that the survivors were the ones that could handle extreme changes
Mm-hmm.
and so were well suited to move into these habitats? That's, yeah, we don't know. And how
Yeah.
much of what we see in our modern llamas and alpacas and camels is representative of their ancient relatives? It seems like maybe more than you'd expect, but also
Mm-hmm.
maybe not all of it.
Well, and it's a case because like it's an interesting case because very often we talk about the fact that being specialized is not good during a mass extinction. That's
Hmm.
going to make you much more vulnerable. But in this case, they're specialized to specific environments that aren't delicate ecosystems. Like the mountain and the desert aren't gonna just go away because the climate shifted. It's not a forest where you're relying on the plant life that is there. This is the terrain that you're adapted to in many ways.
Yeah.
And in this case, you even if you are struggling because of like environmental changes, you might have less competition because most other animals can't come in here to can
Yeah.
stress you.
Well, and that's the thing that, when we talk about these Pleistocene extinctions, how much of this was climate change, how much of this was humans. And in many places, the answer is probably a little bit of both,
Yep.
because both of those are stressors. And together, that can bring down a species. But if you live in the desert, it might be that the changing climate is still going to have impacts, but maybe the humans just don't make it out here, right? This is
Exactly.
just too difficult a climate for humans or other predators that are maybe putting stress on these ecosystems. As some groups like your elephants are disappearing, predators are going to be looking elsewhere to get their food. And if you live in the desert or 6,000 feet up a mountain, maybe you're just safe from that particular stress. And
Mhm.
that little extra reprieve is enough to keep that population going. That, yeah, that could be part of it.
Well, it's how like we see a lot of ancient lineages persist on islands where
Hmm.
when a global shift happens, it's often happening due to the interactions of habitats on the mainlands, but there's no interactions happening on an island. It's just the island. So unless it's a crazy weather shift that's going to destroy that island, the island just goes through it, not
Hmm.
noticing for the most part. Mountains and deserts might kind of have that effect to a degree.
Yeah. Now, all that being said, it is worth noting that every wild species of modern camels are critically endangered.
Yeah.
And again, part of that is because we've been messing up their habitats for a long, long time, but also they're specialists
Mhm, mhm.
and they live in difficult, harsh areas. And so as we encroach upon their habitats, they don't have anywhere else to go.
Yep,
Like
yep.
you can only go up the mountain so far until you
Yes.
run out of space to escape the habitat change that is, creeping up the slopes. And these are all big animals. Camel it's a bit of a miracle that camels made it in the first place, being enormous. No, these are half a ton to a ton animals. Most of those did not survive the megafaunal
Yep.
extinctions, especially outside of places like Africa. So the fact that Bactrian camels, they're like bison, right? Like
Mhm.
you did something special and made it
Yep.
through these extinction events. and they're doing about as well as bison were doing for a while back there. So if you love these, dude, they're so charismatic and
Mm-hmm.
strange and fascinating. You can understand why so many people requested this episode topic.
Yes.
So show them some love, but don't get too close because they will bite you and
Not show
kick
it
you
back.
and spit on you and apparently shake you around like a dog toy.
Yeah, it's camels are a really great example of how being specialized can let you do some really amazing things while still, being a complication that, like, yeah,
Hmm.
they are really tough animals, but if they go out into the grasslands and try to compete with animals in the grasslands, well, those animals are better at being in the grasslands than a camel's going to be. So it's not
Hmm.
like that they're just going to can't handle it, but they are not going to be as good. They are as good as they are at what they do because they live in a place most other large mammals can just not survive.
Yes.
Period. End of sentence.
Well, it's the panda situation where
Yeah.
it's like you've become extremely specialized at eating food no one else can eat,
Hmm.
which is great until that food goes away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Listeners, we hope that you have enjoyed this romp through camel history. This was super cool. Camels are another one of those groups of animals that I knew they were interesting and strange, but putting these notes together helped me to fully comprehend just how interesting and strange they are. If you want more
Yeah.
information, you can check out the blog post on our website where we'll have links and pictures of some of these cool things so that you can learn more. Before we wrap everything up, there's one last thing to do, and that's answer some patron questions. One of the benefits that patrons receive on our Patreon in return for their very generous subscriptions is the ability to ask questions for us to answer here on the podcast. Will, what are our questions today?
Our first question is from Georgia. How would a Paraceratherium have scratched its back? I can't imagine them rolling on the ground like horses. Did they have enough neck flexibility to use their teeth?
This is an excellent question, and I think very fitting for a conversation about giant ungulates.
Yes.
Paraceratherium, we talked about in episode 129, the giant rhinos of the Oligocene. And it's a great question because I don't think they would have been able to like scratch their backs with their mouths,
Mm-mm.
at least not the whole back or with their legs. My guess is that they probably rubbed up against trees.
That would be my bet.
We see this in a lot of animals today. Elephants do this, giraffes do this. I actually don't know how camels scratch their backs, but camels do have pretty flexible necks and
Mm-hmm.
apparently legs that they can scratch their
Yep.
heads with their legs, so they might not have to worry about it as much, which is great because the last place you want to scratch your back with a tree is the desert. But that would be my guess. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if they did roll around on the ground like horses.
Yeah, and like I definitely get what Georgia is getting to in that probably I would not be surprised if they could not roll their legs up into the air, like roll over onto the back. Because
Mhm.
like elephants don't do that when they're full grown. But elephants can lay down on the ground
Mhm.
and this would be also my suggestion for Paraceratherium, they take mud baths.
Yeah.
And things like mud baths, which also rhinos will do, is a great thing because you might not have a great way to scratch the itch, but maybe you can soothe the itch.
Yes. And even if it's not a mud bath, just going in the water
Mm-hmm.
can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful because yeah, you can soothe an itch. If it's a bug, you get the bug off of you. You walk into the
Yeah.
water.
There's definitely the option that they weren't able to really scratch an itch every time they had it. Uh,
Hmm.
you may have just had to put up with it, or maybe they had thick enough hides that it's like, yeah, that's not typically it's not that much of an issue.
Yeah. I also wonder. We don't know how social they were, but
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
also could potentially have rubbed up against each other.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
like that's the thing around that's big enough for you to rub your shoulder against is another Paraceratherium.
Yeah. Yeah. So paleo art of all of those options, please. Our next question is from Cirque. When people ask if you'd rather fight one horse-sized duck or 50 duck-sized horses, I figure the horse-sized duck wouldn't even be a fight because surely duck biomechanics would fail to scale up. But what about shrinking a horse down to the size of a duck? Are there mechanical aspects that would fail to scale down?
This is a fascinating question. I agree that a horse-sized duck is probably gonna struggle. I also feel like a duck-sized horse. I think the duck-sized horse is gonna trip over something and fall over.
What I actually think would kill it first and make an issue is it's going to freeze to death. It's now too
Ah,
small for its surface area.
yeah, that's
The
true.
square cube law is not to be trifled with. Your internal mass, your internal volume does not scale evenly with your external surface area. And if we were the size of a mouse, our extremities would just immediately experience hypothermia due to heat loss because they
Yeah.
are now no longer thick enough to maintain heat. We would
Yeah.
need special adaptations or differently proportioned limbs to not be experiencing massive heat loss.
Yeah, rodents tend not to be shaped like horses. And the
Hmm.
rare cases where they do have like long, slender limbs tend to be things like kangaroo rats that
Yep,
live in very hot, dry environments. That is an excellent
exactly.
point. So, if you're in a fight against 50 duck sized horses, just blow on them.
Yep, just wait a little bit.
Just a bunch of
Uh,
shivering, tiny little, they're like little chihuahuas just shivering down there.
Now here's another prompt for my all you lovely artists out there. What would a duck-sized horse need to be shaped like, and what would that look like? And what would a horse-sized duck be shaped
Mm.
like? Have at it. Draw me my theropod duck and my little rodent horses.
I think a horse-sized duck is just a moa.
Yeah. Yep.
Those we had. Like that's a thing
Mm-hmm.
that exists. And I don't want to fight a moa. I'd
No.
fight 50 duck-sized horses before I fought a
Yeah.
moa.
And for anyone who's wondering, that's the answer. It's the 50 duck-sized horses
100%.
always. That's always the answer.
Because at duck size, even a horse can't catch me.
No.
Worst comes to worst, I just run away
Well,
or
like
climb
a
something.
horse to its body size has a very tiny mouth. Like
Yeah.
horses do not have big mouths to the size of their body. So at duck size, they might be able to like nibble on the tips of my fingers. Uh
Give you a kick.
but a horse-sized duck, that have you seen the Untitled Goose Game? But now it can knock on your door and force entry.
Well, and also, are we talking horse sized like eye level with a horse or horse sized like weight?
I'm going with mass.
Because if that's a half a ton of duck, that's too much bird. That's
I mean, that's
so
just
much bird.
like that's just a theropod dinosaur.
Yeah.
That is just a medium-sized predatory dinosaur.
Yes. And it's also a duck. I don't want to fight a duck sized duck.
Mm-mm.
So, yeah.
Yes.
The small one, yes. But I think duck sized horses would be like rabbits.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which I also don't want to fight a rabbit, but I would fight 50 rabbits over one
Well,
elephant bird.
and once again, the horse, you don't have claws, you don't have sharp teeth. A lot of the things going for rabbits you don't have anymore. You can kick me and I'm sure it will hurt, but
Yeah.
like I can wear tall boots when I go to
Yeah.
this fight.
You just take that, you just win that fight with a leaf blower. Georgia and Cirque, thank you so much for these thought-provoking patron questions. I thought those would be a lot of fun for this episode where we're talking about
Yes.
horse-sized and shaped creatures.
I don't want to fight a camel at any of these size ranges, by the way.
I don't want anything even remotely related to a camel. No, nothing. If you have a scientific name that tells me exactly what you are, I don't want to be in a fight with you. You give me something inscrutable, maybe we'll talk about
Yes.
it.
If I can read your name
is
like it's on a fight poster.
in this corner, weighing way too much and with 10 canines, is a dromedary. Listeners, if you want more camel stuff, check out the blog. If you would like to support the podcast and maybe even ask your own patron questions, head on over to our Patreon. Links on the website, links in the episode description. Don't forget to go over to YouTube and check out Bricks with Bask, where Will's doing Lego stuff, and Pokemon Sand and Bone, where I'm doing Pokemon stuff. And don't forget to check out Leave It to Us for more plant-themed goodness. Also, we're going to be at Dragon Con the first week of September. If you're in Atlanta, come say hi. Big thanks to all of the people who requested this episode. We hope that the wait was worth it. If there's anything that we didn't mention that you were hoping to hear, hop on over to the Discord and start up a chat over there about it with your fellow Discordians. Big thanks to all of our patrons for supporting us here at the podcast. And extra big thanks to our top tier patrons, Jeff Ellington, Danielle Loves Bugs, and Sarah May. We release episodes every fortnight, and we are now on the back half of the 200s. So stay tuned for whatever we get up to. We'll come up with something less weird for next day. Yeah, we got to space out the weird stuff a little bit.
We have a lot ways till 500 now, so
we're on the back end toward 500. Put in your requests now for episode 500. Don't do that. Don't do that because before long, I am going to ask you to give us suggestions for what to do for 300. You could start giving us 500, but listen, we got a lot of other stuff to worry about before we get there.
I want your requests for each of our next 100.
Yes.
300, 400, 500.
We are taking suggestions for episode 1000. How are we going to make just the biggest and best episode of the podcast?
Fight among yourselves.
Would you rather fight one horse-sized listener or 50 duck-sized listeners of the podcast? Let's leave.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.